Hi, everyone. Welcome to Project 180. My name is Kevin McGowan. Today, we're talking with an old friend of mine that I met about a month ago. His name's Daniel Gagnon. He's based in Montreal, or the Montreal area. And if you're interested in agile development and leadership, this is kind of the guy in Canada you want to talk to. He's been in the field for a long, long time. I met him while we were on the hunt for some agile consulting through our one of my gigs, but we hit it off, and I really wanted to dig in some of his experience. And one of the things that he was telling me about was this kind of textbook example of a team that he'd worked on some years ago. That was, I won't say perfect, but really, really good, really, really productive in the agile space. So I asked Daniel if he would come and maybe explain a bit about that experience for everyone else who would like to watch it. So Daniel, please welcome aboard.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'm really pleased to be here.
I'm wondering if you could just, like, I gave a bit of a preview, obviously, but can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. So I would say for the past, I'm going to age myself here, but I've been involved with project management and portfolio management and program management for closing on 2.5 decades now. I have a very long history of working in the project space, working in a space of basically taking requirements, getting them, shepherding them through to an end result. But about 10, 12 years ago, I also stumbled into the world of Agile and through this team, this story I'm about to tell you.
Mhm.
And to me, the way I experienced it, was an absolute inflection point because my first experience was textbook beyond good. It was just an amazing experience, and it set the tone from my subsequent exploration, my subsequent practice, my subsequent learning, my subsequent development when it came to agility, especially in a large organization. So I view myself as someone who, yes, with a firm grounding in the practices and the, the teachings of the project management world, but also firmly within the agile world. And what I walked away from that first experience with and what I've been sharing ever since is that there is no contradiction between those worlds. They aim at the same thing, getting value to customers, value to stakeholders, value to the organization. Uh, and that anyone who tells you otherwise, that they're in conflict and that they're two fundamentally different models, on the surface, yes. But my experience has shown and continues to show me that when you combine the best of both worlds, you get something just far more powerful than the sum of the parts.
I really like how you described that, because one of the things that I've noticed over the years, and I'm also, a couple and a half decades into, my adventures in this space too. But, there's this, I guess, this attitude sometimes that, you have to be waterfall. You have to follow a certain set of rules to get something done. And but that doesn't allow for any creativity or any real agility in my view, right? Like you can say you're agile, but if you don't really cater to how your team needs to work, your organization functions, if you're trying to squeeze these rules into an existing framework,
Mm.
it's going to fail, right? I've seen that over again. Like, it's almost like a religious debate. You have to be one or the other, but no, you can pick and choose and do whatever you want to do with it.
It's a false dichotomy, like I was saying, basically, because ultimately now everything is hybrid.
Hmm.
Everything is hybrid. There, and anyone who says anything to the contrary, you just have to look at their context, look at their situation, and eventually you will see things, practices that are from one world or the other, practices that have been tried and tested for 40 years, practices that are emerging, but ultimately context shapes how organizations work, how teams work within those organizations, how value is delivered, and sticking to dogma of one, either of a traditionalist dogma or an agile dogma or a specific methodology, and trying to fit the context to that dogma is where failure lies, because you're
Yeah.
going against the context, you're going against the culture, you're going against what makes an organization and its people tick. So everything is hybrid. That's one of my mantras.
Well, that's great, and it's refreshing to hear that, because in so many spaces, it's like you have to do it a particular way. Especially, and you've been a consultant. I know lots of consultants. It seems to be something that a lot of consultants say, right? Because you gotta get in there and do things my way. But the better approach is to try and get into an organization, understand how they work, and then build something with them, right? And that's kind of what happened, I think, with this great story. Like, you joined a team, but I'm wondering if you can kind of go back to year zero on
Yep.
this kind of textbook beautiful team that you worked on, and just explain how it all came together.
Yeah. So year zero was probably, I guess if the memory serves correct, probably around mid to late 2011. This team was already operating on an agile model. It was a mixture of Scrum and Kanban. It was homebrewed, and the team had been together by the time I joined the team. The team had been together for a while. They had previous project managers within the organization. Just for context, so this was a team working in the insurance space. They were working on an insurance portal for home and auto insurance in one of Canada's largest banking financial groups. So the team had been together. That alone was innovative at the time for a large bank or insurance company. The team had been already together for over a year, and they had reached a level of maturity in their interactions and so on. So I joined this team as the project manager, and I didn't really have much of an idea of what Agile was. I'd heard of it, but it's not something that had piqued my interest to the point where I had investigated. In fact, the funny story is I had been sitting next to this team when I was managing another project previous to being assigned to this team. I tended to find them disruptive. They were loud and garrulous and laughing, and I even asked if I could be moved at one point because they were disturbing my conference calls. So, so my
So you have
first my
this wild group of
yeah.
people kind of operating and throwing push balls or whatever at each other or something.
Who are these mavericks? And then when I went to complain and wanted to change, she says, "Oh, by the way, you're going to be we'd like you to be the PM on this team because the contract of the previous project manager is over." And I said, "Oh, really?" So, well, I don't even understand how they're working. And in my mind, I go, "Well, maybe this would be a chance for me to, set them straight, get them working properly." What
Yeah.
hubris! What incredible hubris! So I did start working with them, and within weeks, I realized this team was performing at a level of collaboration and cooperation and productivity and value delivery unlike anything I'd seen in my career, basically. And
Yeah.
they were doing it having fun, they were doing it respectfully of each other, and they were doing it despite numerous organizational impediments. I mean, we're talking over 10 years ago. So the idea of organizational agility within a large financial institution at that point was not well established. So they kept
Yeah.
bumping into all sorts of organizational invisible electric fences, as Don Reinerson calls them. So I started working with them, and when that realization came to me, it was like a switch going on. And I decided to immerse myself and completely give myself over to their model of working and learn as much as I could. So I started not only engaging with them on a daily basis, but also, reading and learning and taking certifications and becoming the best agile PM I could. So here are a couple of the things that I saw in that team that I think were the secret sauce. I've already mentioned one. They'd been together for quite some time. That in itself was unusual, but because this was a long program or the precursor to a product or a value stream mode, it was in fact in the cards that they would stay together for the time it took to get this portal up and have all the functionality that had been dreamt up for it. So it was a 3 year. I stayed with the team almost 3 years, and they continued delivering after, in the same model after I left the team. So definitely constant, I mean, members did change over time, but the core team remained together because they were on basically a precursor to a value stream. The second thing I observed was they were very context driven and very pragmatic about their decisions around agile practices. And one of the contributing factors to that was their Scrum Master. So they did not have a full-time Scrum Master school marming them about and going on about the Scrum Guide. There was none of that.
Right. Right.
The Scrum Master was actually the most respected, most experienced developer, specialized in a particular programming language, but who had risen to de facto moral leadership of the team through his human centricity and his mentorship. And when they started using agile practices, he sort of emerged as the one to experiment with these practices. So he became their agile coach slash Scrum Master. But that was only a few hours a week of actually, running the
Right.
various Scrum events and so on. And as I said, it wasn't just Scrum. Sometimes there was a Kanban-like approach. So there was none of this constant meddling from a process imposition point of view that too often now we see with all the Scrum Masters, all the Agile coaches who could be, unfortunately, some of them are very dogmatic, and
Yeah.
because the Agile industrial complex has transformed the idea of a Scrum Master or an Agile coach into a full-time job as opposed to a part-time role within a team, you get this process, drive-by process imposition as opposed to really understanding what the team is about and what the product is about and what the value stream is about. So that person, and he's became, many of these people are still good friends. I'm still good friends with today. He's since moved to the U.S. where he's in another big financial institution. But he was incredible in that he was able to just up the game and do it in a way that respected the team, respected the context. They got things done. They didn't let agility get in the way. They didn't get perfection of their agile practices get in the way. So he took care
Right.
of all the team-based things and really kept them humming and inspired them. He wasn't just school marming, he was inspiring. And that's another thing that agile coaches and scrum masters would need to learn. Many of those I've come across, they're well-intentioned, but they aren't inspiring. So he was
Right.
incredibly inspiring, and he had natural leadership.
Well, I can dig in on that for a second because that is such a critical piece. And like I've done, Scrum mastering, and I've worked in different teams doing different things like that. And it's always been kind of like you're saying, kind of drive by, right? You're like, okay, how's we're doing today? Great. And then you're off doing something else. To actually be part of that team and to be respected as the lead, wildly different view. So how did I want to? You joined the team later, but who in the organization championed this model? Because I can only imagine, like, this very structured financial institution, this must have been maybe a tough thing to sell. How maybe did that evolve?
I'll tell you a secret about this, and this is one of the reasons also that I figured out, and the team knew as well, that they were able to develop their own processes and be left alone to the extent that they were, is because the project or the program or the value stream, whatever we want to call it at this point, the My Insurance portal that they were working on was a minor project in terms of budget compared to a much larger initiative that was going on simultaneously also in the insurance space. The much larger um, project or value stream got all the management attention, some good, some bad. So this team was sort of flying under the radar to a certain
Yeah.
extent. They weren't important enough to be constantly under management's magnifying glass, if you will.
Right.
And it was a fortuitous thing because at the time, as I said, 10 years ago, the rest of the organization, from governance to compliance to security to privacy to infrastructure to you name it, weren't really set up for frictionless delivery in a more frequent fashion of value that the agile model was allowing. So the under the radar aspect helped a bit. Well,
Sure.
another thing that did also help was when I came aboard, and once I had understood what they were doing, once I had understood how they were doing it, I teamed up with this Scrum Master and the rest of the team, and we sort of struck a deal. He would take care of the team-based aspects I was mentioning earlier, and I was able to turn my attention with knowledge and understanding of how the team was working towards removing sort of the friction with the rest of the organization. So with the
Right.
PMO, with with the executives, with infrastructure, getting infrastructure into place, with security, with audit. So I was able to create an interface that spoke to, because of my years of traditional project, I spoke the language that audit
Mhm.
wanted to hear. Or I spoke the language that compliance wanted to hear. I could be very, I could be very amenable and very understanding of security controls and so on. But I created a dialogue. I was able to create a dialogue between, okay, what are your needs as a security organization within, within the bank, and how can our team meet your needs without necessarily going through all the hoops that a more sequential way of delivering would necessarily entail.
Right.
For example, even with finance, if you want to add a feature, you would usually do some kind of business case, etc. But we also had a very, very, and this was another incredibly important thing to have, the product owner, who was also a experienced product manager, also understood his role and played it to perfection and was able to really manage the business expectations, not only in terms of what could be accomplished in a certain time frame, but also getting them to even dream further, getting the
Yeah.
business to take input from the team. So essentially you had the two sort of agile roles, the product owner, the scrum master, the team, all those operating at sort of a peak. And then my role, which is not usually present in any of the literature, there's not usually an agile project manager
Yeah.
working with one of these teams, but my presence in the role and the role that I was able to play was the final sort of linchpin necessary for all of this alchemy uh, to sort of
Yeah.
take place for 2.5 years or 3 years, whatever it was.
Well, it's a great opportunity to be able to have something that it's almost like an unintentional pilot program, right? Like, okay, just let these bad news bears go off and try and figure something out. Nah,
Yep.
they're not going to do anything, whatever. Um, which really is the perfect opportunity to just go off and knock people's socks off, right? And clearly the team did that. Did that kind of impact and affect the rest of the organization kind of writ large in
Well,
terms of how they approach projects beyond that or those smaller
absolutely. I
areas of the
think it
business?
was absolutely. It had many long-term effects. The first was, for example, in terms of trust. So there were there were other value streams within the wider organization. I think of one which was in another line of business altogether, which had the project had a similar size code base, a similar size team, etc.
Mm.
But they had 1,000% of our technical debt, and they had to spend something like 8 months in a production acceptance environment before the infrastructure team would trust them enough to push that next iteration of the application into production. We got to the point
Right.
where that same infrastructure team for the entire bank only required us to be in that production acceptance environment 8 hours, not 8 months.
8 months to 8 hours.
8 months to 8 hours. So, oh, it's the Montreal team on the insurance thing. It's gonna be like usual.
A
No
hell of a metric.
conflicts, no collisions, no defects. We delivered no defects, zero defects every time we went into production, by the way,
Yeah.
which would have also never been seen. So at that
Yeah.
point, they just said, no, it's the Montreal crew on the insurance and let them through. And that attracted the attention of the enterprise PMO and also of basically the digital channel. So the upshot was both, well, the three players who were basically seen the most by management. So it was the Scrum Master,
Mhm.
the PO, and myself. We were all promoted away into organizational roles
Right.
where
Help
we
feed that
were
knowledge elsewhere.
to feed the knowledge elsewhere. And that's when my tenure ended, and so did the three of us. Pretty much within the same 4-month period, were lifted up into the wider organization. Help us replicate this.
Right. Well, Daniel, let me ask you one more thing because we're getting kind of close to the end. And it's a nice kind of aspirational, I guess, question. But seeing what you've seen in that example, and obviously, before and since, you've been doing this stuff a while, but there's still a lot of large organizations who only want to do things a particular way. And maybe they're thinking, oh, we could try this agile thing. Like how honestly, how do they start? Like if they even think, we really need to get on this, well now, 20-year bandwagon of agile development, but like, how do we start? What's the best way for the organization or leadership to say, okay, let's get into this?
Well, you mentioned one thing when you said unintentional pilot. Well, unintentional pilot obviously is a great way to start, because a pilot, such as we were unintentionally, a pilot will show you where the pain points are, right? So the first thing I would not do is try to create an everything everywhere all at once type transformation. Those fail.
Right.
Those fail
Yeah.
for every reason we can possibly imagine. It's just too much. It's just too much for an organization to undertake. It's too much change at once. We're incredibly bad at change management in these organizations, no matter how much we try. So start with a pilot, and don't start with a preset idea of following a specific methodology. Take it as a do it yourself. I mean, you've hired smart people. You might need maybe a consultant to help sort of point in the right direction, but certainly you don't need the staff augmentation and the army of consultants, generating the PowerPoints. Just start and try something, and that trying something will show you where the pain points are. And then you can say, well, what is this pain point? What is it revealing about the organization? What changes could we try that would ease this pain point? Would we want to? What's the return on our investment of time and energy in addressing this pain point? And just knock up against the barriers. You have to run into the electric fences to see where they are, what voltage they're set to, and can they easily be removed without creating a ruckus across the organization.
It's a great metaphor, the electric fence, by the way. So thanks for that.
Not mine.
I'll
It's
keep
Don Reinertson in his book. I was going to say movie. His book, The Principles of Product Flow, I think it's called.
Awesome. Well, I'll go check that one out too. I haven't heard that or haven't read that. Well, look, Daniel, I know we could go on all day, but we can't. But I want to say thanks so much. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it, and I'm very happy to hear more about this story.
It was a pleasure.